Leonard P. Zachem Bunker Hill Bridge. Bunker Hill, 1775, the battle took place right across the way here in Charlestown, the bloodiest battle of the whole Revolutionary War. We've got Lenny Zachem.
Welcome to Occupations, the podcast, where we discuss what it's like to hold specific jobs. Occupations is brought to you by lotsofmaps.com, where you fulfill your vintage map gifting needs. Visit lotsofmaps.com.
Hi, and welcome to Occupations, where we learn a little bit about what people do and what it takes to do those jobs. My name is Andy Jaglinzer, and I'm your host. And I'm here with Steve Heffernan, who is a Boston Duck Tour driver and narrator. And Steve, welcome.
Hello there, Andrew. We're called conductors.
Conductors?
With a duck in the middle.
Oh, very clever.
Conductors.
Very clever. That's very good. I always like the cleverness of duck tours for sure, because they certainly allow you guys to do a lot of really fun things. And I've taken your tours a few times and had a lot of fun. So welcome, and we're here to learn a little bit about what it's like to be a duck tour driver. So tell me, how long have you been working for the Ducks?
This is the ending of my 13th season.
Wow.
Yeah.
13 years. That's a lot of time. And how long have they been in business? Do you know?
The Ducks started in 94 in Boston.
Okay.
And they had only 4 ducks at the time, and they started late, like in September, I think.
Okay.
And they came back and started growing after that.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about the vehicle, because that obviously is really probably the big seller of the whole thing. Other than the conductors.
Yes.
But that certainly is a big seller. Tell me a little bit about the vehicles.
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me about that. And since I've been driving for 13 seasons, you think I would know. And luckily, I looked up the sign that we have in the cockpit. And, it's 36 feet long. It is 11 feet 9 inches tall, and 8.5 feet wide. And I believe it's 20 tons. With people on it, 20 tons. Now, we originally had about, I think it was about 16 ducks from the 1940s.
Wow.
And then we had the newer ones that were made in the Midwest. And now, over the years, they would retire some of the old ones and get new ones. And now we have 28 ducks.
Wow.
And none of them are from the 1940s.
Got it. And are they basically the same as the old ones? Are they making them the same way they originally were?
They are bigger, and they are. Oh yeah.
Wow.
The old ones were open in the back, so there were seats in the back and facing the other direction, which is interesting. And they were lower to the ground, and they always felt a little like a little sports car compared to the big ones. Now we just have all the big ones, so it's all the same shape and same look. But the old ones too, they were built in the 40s. They didn't go to the war, because if they were sent overseas, they never came back.
Right.
So I think some narrators would kind of make you feel like they were in the war. These ducks were made for the war, or they'd say these ducks were in the war, and like there wouldn't be any bullet holes or anything, because if they got sent overseas, they never came back.
Right.
But these ones are bigger and just more reliable in the water is the big thing, which I like.
Well, tell me a little bit about, what's it like to drive one of these beasts? Now, that is a big, big vehicle, and probably dangerous. And I know you don't speed through the city, so I'm sure that's a big part of driving it. But I know that's a pretty big beast to drive.
Very, very true. We have mirrors all over the place, so technically there are no real blind spots. And I should say that we had a big change 6 years ago when we went from being someone like me who drove and narrated to now we have drivers and narrators on every duck. So we have 2 people on every duck.
So there's somebody who's responsible for driving and then someone else who's responsible for narrating.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. And I miss the energy of doing it all myself, because it was fantastic. I mean, it was amazing to be in control of all of it, and it was your show. And now the driver and narrator have to be a team and figure that all out.
Sure.
And we've added over the years, sensors. So they're now the front right is where all the action takes place, because these cars will come and try to sneak in front, and if the duck doesn't see them right away, they could, take off their mirror and maybe run into their hood or something like that. So there's a sensor there. Even if a bicycle came up and stopped at a red light, it would go off, like someone sitting right there in the front. And you got the narrator is supposed to help. Like you got a car coming up on your right, this guy's going to squeeze in. Look out! You got a bicycle. So while we're narrating, sometimes we say, "Hey, Bob, look out for this guy." So you've got another set of eyes. You've got the sensors. We now have video, video screens that are right there in the cockpit. We don't usually call it cockpit, but we'll call it cockpit. So you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
And as a tech guy, you'll appreciate this. One of the views looks like there's a drone overhead.
Oh.
It's real time. It's a composite of all the cameras, and if someone came by or someone on the crosswalk, it's real time. So people will see that. The guests will see that and go, "How are we getting that shot from a bird's eye view?" And that's what's going on. So there's a lot of safety stuff on the ducks that they didn't used to have. They've been adding and adding.
So it's a real mix of old world technology and new world technology for sure. With that, that's great.
True.
And for those of you who don't know, these trucks / cars, you call it a truck?
It's a duck.
It's a duck. So it has its
a DUKW.
It's a
duck.
Got its own designation. So for those of you who don't know, these things drive right into the water.
Mm-hmm.
What's that like?
I love splashing in the Charles. We go in the mighty, mighty Charles River, and we have our own dedicated ramp over across the street from the Museum of Science, and people get very excited about it. It's fun to learn. The ducks respond very slowly to the helm, and so in the beginning when you're learning, you're turning and nothing's happening. So you're going towards a wall and you're like, this is not working, it's not working, it's not working. And then it kicks in. And so once you know it, you know how to do it. But there's definitely lots of duck colors on the wall there when training, kind of going into the wall. And but it never gets old. And it's also great because I'm sure every job has something you don't like about it, right? There's some negativity. One of the big things for the ducks is traffic. If we didn't have any traffic, that job would just be heaven.
Right.
And then,
right.
Traffic comes in, you're like, oh. But then you splash in the water and there's no traffic. And if there is traffic, it's fun traffic, which the 4th of July, we get lots of private boats. And I love that kind of traffic. And we get in the water and it's fun. So you have at least 20, 25 minutes of the tour where traffic's not a problem. And you get out in the water. And it's interesting, too, because it changes. The pace of the tour changes, because when you're on the street, you want to hit, and this is this church, and then you're coming up here, and this is happening, and you got to kind of boom, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom. And then you get in the water, and you go, okay, now we've got some time to relax. I can tell some longer stories. And so it's a nice little change of pace.
So I assume nobody gets fishing poles.
Fishing poles. No.
You don't pass those out while you're out in the Charles.
I do. I have in my bag here. What I've done is, and I stole this from another narrator. I will, on some tours, take this glass that I have a string tied around and dip it in the water to show people what it looks like. So people think it's going to be dark, because it's a long story, but the Charles looks very dark. But when you take out the water, it's clean and it's rated swimmable most days of the year.
Nice.
And so I will lean over and get that sample. Can I say more about the vehicle?
Yeah, please.
The height of it is awesome, because silly me, some of my cousins were in town one time and it was the off season. I said, I'll take you through the city. I'll kind of do my tour. And we were in a little car and we're driving. And I go, oh, wow, you can't see anything from down here. Also, the windshield's open, which I think is cool. Now, you're a bit of a car guy. What was it? The Thing, I think. How many cars windshields go down? Very few, right?
Yeah.
A couple Jeeps,
exactly,
old Jeeps.
Yeah.
But to be able to just push that windshield down, is you get the breeze. I mean, we had such a hot summer this year. It always saves us, that breeze coming in and just the views. And I love that the windshield goes down and that you're up high. You got a great view. You're just cruising through town, and it's a nice thing to do. It really is.
That's awesome. It's an unusual vehicle for sure, and to build a business around that is a great idea. I think the ingenuity to start a business based on that is really unusual, because before these things came upon us, it was nothing but land-based tours, and I'm sure they're all wonderful, but it gives a whole new dimension to the
It's
whole
true.
thing.
It started in the Wisconsin Dells.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know that area?
I've been there. Yeah,
You've been
I've
there.
many,
So
many years
they
ago.
started there. Somebody started that, and our founder, Andy Wilson, who sadly I never got to meet, he went there and saw the tours there, and he said, "Let's bring this to an urban setting." So I'm pretty sure we were the first urban setting for DUKWs. Yeah, so Duck, and that all stands for something military. And we talk about it on tour. I mean, I don't want to go into my tour, but I'll probably dip into it. But some people say duck boat, and the media always says rev up the duck boats for the championship parades.
Right.
But for people in the biz, like it's just a duck. It's a duck. That says it all. Get the duck. But everyone says duck boats.
Great. Anything else you want to talk about with the vehicle
Well, I should
itself?
tell you what the duck means. I mean, D is the military designation for 1942.
Oh.
Because that's when they were designed. U means utility vehicle. And the K means a front-wheel drive, like a K car, I guess. And they said if you make a K, it looks like it has an arrow. So it's front-wheel drive. And W was 2 rear axles. So that's how you get the DUKW.
Very interesting.
And so
it
some
has
people say
nothing
Duckwa.
to do with the fact that it goes on land and in the
Well,
water.
then, of course, the military guys are like, well, it goes in the water. Let's call it a duck.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the job. So, unusual job. I mean, a tour driver is unusual enough, and you have to learn how to drive a bus or whatever vehicle you're driving. But to be able to take this, onto the sea or into the Charles River and continue it that way, and let me ask you this. Because it goes in the water, I would imagine you need special licensing on land and on water, I would assume, as far as being able to drive it. What kind of licensing does it take to drive that vehicle?
That is very true. So when I started 13 years ago, I didn't have a boating license. Some of the early guys in the 1990s were all captains. That's where they got them. So the captains would drive these. But then they started doing where you had people coming from all different things, like maybe a comedic background or historic background, something like that. So they had to train us. So they trained me so that I could get my boating license from the Coast Guard. And that's what you need now. It's not extensive. It's called a launch tender license, but it's still a Coast Guard license, and you have to keep it up. And so you have to have your physicals and that kind of thing. So we have a CDL, commercial driver's license, and that went up to a B. So we were a C, I think. And since Americans and other people are getting heavier, because it's the weight of the vehicle. So when all the weight of the guests went up, we had to upgrade our licenses to a Class B. Because it must have gone over. It was like, well, now that is a Class B. It used to be a Class C, at least classified as one. So we have, and we also got a TWIC card, which is Transportation Workers Identification Credential, and that allows you. It's just kind of it's a Homeland Security thing. But so that you can go into like wharfs and things like that. And we need it because we pick up at the cruise ships. And if we go in the wharf there. So yeah, you got a TWIC card, you got a Coast Guard license, a CDL, and then the Jitney and the Hackney from Boston and Cambridge. And we get trained in CPR and first aid, so you get those things. So yeah, it's a whole bunch of stuff.
Much more impressive than the average person would think to be trained to be able to do that job. You don't think of things like CPR training and things like that, but that's
True.
Certainly helpful. Being in the public and knowing that we're all getting heavier and more likely to have a heart attack. It's nice to have CPR training. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about training. So you get the job. You go for an audition, or what do you need to do to prove that you are worthy of becoming a duck driver?
Yes, you're exactly right. And auditions are in early December. So, yes, you come in and you do kind of like some improv stuff. They don't know how many people they actually need to hire until kind of the season starts in the spring. And so they offer some people the job, and then they might come back and offer some other people a job, and some people drop out, that kind of thing.
Great. Do they need to test your memory skills? I mean, obviously you have to memorize a ton. Is there something along the lines of that? Are they looking for, well, and let me ask you this too, because I know that each driver has their own personality. Are they expecting you to sort of show your personality, tell them your idea for a personality right there in the audition, or no?
Yeah, so we all have a character, and my character is Jigsaw. And when I made it, they had only made one horror movie about this guy Jigsaw, and I was like, well, that'll go away and no one will know about it. I think they've made 8 or so, and one of them was actually called Jigsaw. But the reason I did is because I create games, and I talk about there is a big gaming history in Massachusetts. So Milton Bradley started in Springfield, and Parker Brothers started in Salem, and I can weave in some game stuff. But most people for the auditions don't have to have a character ready to go. We've got some people now, some of our narrators who have moved into kind of a management position of helping people create their characters.
Great.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, we're going to get to, I guess, like a typical day kind of thing. But one of the questions one of the older guys asked, actually it was like his main question. His name's Groovy. And Groovy was from, well, he's about 75 now or so. But he would say, are you going to show up to work? Because he goes, this is not a desk job. You can't come back the next day after you take a day off and say, well, I'll just get to the paperwork that backed up, while I wasn't here yesterday. So if you don't show up, someone else has to do your tours. So that was his main thing was, I want to know, are you coming to work? We need people who are going to come to work.
Right to the point, right? Yeah. I guess we can't do your job without you, right?
We can't. Yeah, you can't do it later. You can't choose when to do it.
Is there anything else about the audition?
Well, we do hatch. We get hatched is what happens, and so as a duck person, so you start the training, and nowadays it's more you're either going to be a driver or a narrator. As I said, now there can be people who still do both, and there are people like me who did both, so we still do it. But some people can be hired now to do both, but
not at the same time. But
one at
yes,
a time, right. But so when you get hatched, that's when they let you actually take out real people, and so that's interesting. But it took us, I want to say about 2 months, because just learning how to drive and taking the boating classes to get our license and to learn the history and all of that together. So it was like, ooh, who's going to hatch? But yeah, it was probably 6, 7, 8 weeks.
Well, it's a long time to prepare for a job, for sure. I bet the excitement or frustration probably builds while you're waiting that month and a half, 2 months to finally be able to go out on your own. I'm sure the anticipation is pretty big to want to become that.
Yeah, we would take other people's tours, and early on, I was just so impressed. I was like, how do you know? They seem to know something about every street, every building. And I look up like, wow, I don't know if I can do that. And then just little by little, keep layering it up. And of course, now I think most people would say if they look back at their jobs or at their careers, if they're an athlete or a musician or something, and like, wow, I thought I was pretty good back then. I was like, I didn't know anything. It's like I feel bad for the people who paid for my tour 13 years ago. Although it's not always that cut and dry, right? Because as a newbie, you're fresh off the book, so you might know stuff that the veteran hasn't been talking about. And if we don't talk about it year after year after year, you don't really know it. So there's parts of the training book where I'm like, yeah, I decided I didn't think that was that interesting, so I don't talk about it. So a new person could ask me, it's like, isn't it true that John Hancock, blah, blah, blah? I'm like, maybe.
But you don't know everything?
I don't know everything.
That's very disappointing, I must admit.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Who's the typical client? I know that the age range is all over the place. I would imagine Boston being a very big tourist town, you must have mostly tourists, but you correct me if I'm wrong. I know lots of locals. I've taken the tour, What percentage do you think are locals versus tourists? Ballpark. I know you don't know that for sure, but
It's a good question. It might be anecdotal because I have a cousin who lives in town, and he will bring people whenever he has guests from out of town. He'll bring them. So I think a lot of people do that. We get a lot of people who like, wow, I've never taken the tour. So the Ducks have been going 20-something years, since '94. And they'll say, I've never taken the tour. I think it's an interesting product because it's kind of sold. The line goes, one big splash and the rest is history. And that's one of our taglines. And so it can backfire in some ways or be twisted a little bit because, like, during this hot weather, people hear one big splash. Let's take the kids on this one big splash. Well, we're going through the city for an hour. And they're like, oh my God, it's 90 degrees out. We're going to the city for an hour. Where's that big splash? We're still waiting for the big splash. So it's some people think it's it's geared towards children too. Well, I like to say there's no perfect tour. And so if I do all history, there's going to be somebody who said, geez, that was kind of dry. And if I do all comedy, someone's going to say, I didn't get any history. So as the Ducks, I think they tell us we'd like, I think, about 80% history and throw in about 20% jokes to keep it light. There are people who, so the different narrators focus on different things. So again, back to it being a tough thing to market and sell the tour is because it sounds like a kid's tour. And so that's why I can imagine a 45-year-old guy and his girlfriend or something like, why would we want to go on this kid's tour? And some of the narrators might be more focused towards a younger audience, maybe. I try to get something for everybody. So if there's a really young person all the way up to grandma, I try to get something for everybody. But it is a history tour. So I feel my job is to make history fun. So I'm doing history, but I'm making it interesting. But I do get people who will take a tour and they had never taken one, and they're hopefully very surprised and like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was going to be this fun and interesting. And it's like, I thought, oh my gosh, Paul Revere, whatever. And we get a lot of kids groups, school groups, and I'll hear narrators say, oh, these kids, they wouldn't listen or anything. And I said, well, it's your job. It's your job to interest them so much that they will sit down and listen. So, yeah, it's a wide range of guests.
Do you have a G-rated version of history and also an R-rated version of history, depending on your audience? Are there facts that you may pull out, knowing there's not a kid on board, that you might say, all right, we can go a little racy on this particular thing? Or
Andy, that's a good question. Definitely not R. Maybe a little PG. But what we're reminded of all the time is that we are ambassadors to the city. And our microphones, our speakers are very loud. And so you could have a bunch of adults, and yet people on the street hear us.
Yeah.
People on the street hear us. Yeah, so people have tried to say, oh, yeah, no, it was a corporate group, and we were totally cool with it. It was like, what about those people on the street? And they really do hear us. And we get stuff. We'll get things from Cheers, because sometimes people will say stuff about Cheers. Well, it's really disappointing because it doesn't look like the show at all. And they'll come out of they'll be like, thanks, Duck Tours, telling everybody not to come to our bar. And I always say, don't be disappointed. It doesn't look like the show. I'll say it's a great bar, but it doesn't look like the show because they did not film in there. But definitely a great bar, and I play it up, which it is. And we are all part of Boston. We're not supposed to talk about negative stuff, and I don't. If people ask us about the marathon bombing, I don't bring that up. If they ask about it, I might say something quickly, and I say we can talk about it later if you want, because sometimes right after it happened, people, restaurants and stuff along the route would be like, every time you come by, you're talking about this. People are listening to that all day long. Can can we get a little more upbeat?
Yeah, and you're not trying to scrub history. I assume you're
No.
really just trying to be more focused on the positive.
And it's an hour and 20-minute tour, and I'm talking the whole time. You can't get to everything. So it's not like there's dead air and you're not going to talk about marathon history or something like that, it's like you're trying to fit in so much. And at the end, you didn't talk about the molasses disaster, and you didn't talk about this and that. So there's so many fun and cool things to bring in. Why even waste time on the negative? But yeah, I love the, history and yeah, I'll talk about anything, especially after the tour. Yeah.
Even Rosie Ruiz, do you ever?
Even Rosie Ruiz, who, if you don't know, she took a subway on the marathon in 1980, and I like when things come up. So I've been doing this 13 years, and so something came up in the news, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, that she had died, and then they said, or did she? So
she's on her way to heaven, but she's on the subway.
She's going the fast route.
Lotsofmaps.com. Vintage, local, national, and world maps for an affordable price. 99% of our maps are $25 or less. Great as gifts. Frame them or put them under glass for your home, vacation home, or as a memory of a special place. Lotsofmaps.com.
All right, so let's dive into what you talk about on the tour. We don't have to get into specifics, but let's be general on this. Obviously, we're going to hear the names we all know, the Paul Revere's, the John Hancocks and things like that. How deep do you go into characters that the average person doesn't know?
It's a good question. As far as narration goes, I do try to change it up. So I try to do some facts, and then I usually finish with like maybe a little funny thing, just a little line, and then tell a story, and then ask questions. So you change the pace of it, because if you just get up there and you drone, it just sounds like droning if you're just telling dates and whatnot. One of my techniques too is to ask questions, because if I told you when they figured out how to use ether at Mass General Hospital, and before that date that I haven't told you, I'll say that a lot of people would get operated on fully awake, right? And they would die from the trauma of the operation. Now, if I just tell you the date, you might just go, oh, yeah, that sounds about right, or something. But if I say, what year do you think that is, and make you think about it, and I'll make the whole duck think about it. We're on the water at this point, so I can go a little bit deeper. And so I'll pull out one person and ask. And Andy, do you have any guesses when they figured out how to use ether to put people to sleep?
I've been to the Ether Dome,
yeah.
and my memory is not so good. I believe it was late 1800s, early 1900s.
So I had a young person on my duck recently, 19 years old. I asked him. He said 1995.
And
I said,
thinking that's probably not
you
true.
just don't care about anything that happened before you were born, do you? This is just a blank slate. And then I asked another guy, and he was right in front of me, and he said 1846. And I looked at him. I said, are you a doctor? He said, yes. I said, do you work over there? He goes, yes, I do. 1846, yeah. So it was before the American Civil War. And this is my narration right now. I'll talk about trying to put things in perspective, too, because you don't want to kill people with dates. People are like, why do we care if it was 1846 or 1886? What was before the American Civil War? And so many people needed that. And then I'll try to bring in some pop culture like Dances with Wolves, because the opening scene is on the American Civil War battlefield. And the first line is the doctors are about to amputate Kevin Costner's leg. And they say, we just ran out of ether. So it's kind of like if I see something that comes back like, oh, good. Yeah, that was it. They had found out in 1846, and this is a little bit later. I like when it brings it together, because people will respond to it in different ways.
Of course, there's always those movies that are
Wrong.
fascinately very, very wrong and are way off the mark, and you wonder who's in charge of continuity, but whatever. What do they say? Roman soldiers don't wear watches.
Oh, there you go. Is that Ben-Hur? We are allowed to steal, borrow from other narrators. If we hear a joke or part of history or something, a nice way of saying something, we're allowed to take it, except if it's something you can hear at the duck stop. So we have 3 duck stops, the Prudential, the Museum of Science, and the Aquarium. And so if guests are going to hear an introduction, and you try to steal that, the next guest could be sitting there that came a little bit early, and they already heard that, and now you hear it. It's like, no, you can't take anything that people are going to hear at the like the beginning or the end of the tour. So I was pretty happy. Somehow I came up with a crescendo to start my tour. And I think it was my first year. And I remember some of the veterans going, oh, that's pretty good. Because here are these strangers. They don't know if they got a good narrator. They don't know. They've been waiting in the heat and whatever. And I immediately, we got to get out of here and get some wind through your hair. And we need a crescendo. And that works even if they don't speak English very well. They're like, oh, what's happening? And all of a sudden, whoa, and we go away. And the people on the side like, wow, like he's known them for 30 seconds and they're doing what he wants them to do. Which right there is a big thing, right? And you get buy-in. And the other thing I do is right away, I say, welcome to Chicago, everyone, as we're driving off. And because otherwise you have to get a laugh early. I've driven for other narrators and they might wait like 12 minutes and they actually say something very funny at the 12th minute mark, but people are not primed. They haven't been laughing. They haven't had the smile going and they're like, oh, that was kind of funny, but I'm not in a laughing space yet. So I want people to know right away. So I'd say, welcome to Chicago. We are the Windy City. Wrigley Field was built in 1914. And so it's kind of like, okay. And then and that's all I know about Chicago. So then they know, okay, this guy's going to be goofy, and then they go get some people early on, like this guy's going to be too goofy. And then I'll hit him with some serious history, like, oh, okay. All right, so he's got, good. Okay, we're not just going to be listening to goofy stuff. He's got real, so it's a real balancing act.
That's great. And I suppose you're pretty good about reading your audience and understanding what's working, what's not. And do you need to adjust on the fly sometimes just depending on the reactions you get?
Totally. And it's interesting because we'll have a little test balloons, definitely. Now, if you go from different locations, so there's sometimes you can't have the same intro because you're going by different things in the first couple minutes. So there's some narrators like, oh, I got a really good starting for the Prudential tour, but then at the Museum of Science not as good because I don't know what to talk about there or whatever. But I have a line for the old the King's Chapel burial ground. And I'll say that this is the oldest burial ground in Boston. And Mary Chilton came over on the Mayflower. She's buried there. John Winthrop, in charge of the first Puritans in Boston, buried there. And even the guy who invented the crossword puzzle. And he is kind of point over. You go, he is 5 across and 6 down. And if you get like nothing out of that, then you know that either they're sleeping through it or not sleeping through it, but they don't have to be listening. They paid their money. If they just want to ride around Boston, look at the buildings, they can do that. I'm really not the star, right? The city is the star. The duck is the star. But then if I get nothing out of that, which is very rare, but if I get nothing, I'm like, okay. And then I take all the jokes out because I'm like, if they don't want the jokes, I'm not going to do them. And it's easier. It's easier not to do the jokes. I can do the history. The jokes take something out of you because there's timing and you have to show your face and smile and get them all. If you want to do just history, great. I'll just do that. So it's every once in a while. Yeah. But you usually get something out of that, and you get and it's also the rolling one too, where it takes them a moment, and then they'll start laughing a little bit. Like, okay, I'll catch up a little bit.
So the stupid people is what you're saying. Do you ever get groups of people that have never a full busload of people? Maybe it's a group of folks that have never done crossword puzzles before.
That could be it. They haven't heard about that. They haven't made it to Ohio yet.
I would imagine that would be a failure of a test balloon because So tell me, how many tours do you give in a day? And what is your day like? How long are the tours? I would imagine you go specific routes. Are there alternate routes that you can take?
There are alternate routes, yes. So a typical day, which is, so I do training of new duck tour narrators and drivers. And so, yeah, sometimes they come in, they have no idea, well, what is my day going to look like? So our ducks are in Dorchester. We have 28 of them. They all are parked inside now. When I got there were ducks that had to park outside, but they built another part of the garage. And so you start out in Dorchester, and you know by the schedule where your first tour is and when and where it is. So you could be at 9 o'clock at the MOSS, Museum of Science. That means you're going to clock in 65 minutes before. So your first tour is 9, so you clock in at 7:55, and you change. If you're a narrator, you're going to change into your character outfit. If you're a driver, you're going to do what you need, put on whatever you want. But you can do a circle check. So we're professional drivers. We have to check the vehicle, and we go under it. We have to go underneath it. There are 7 plugs in the duck, and if a plug is left out, if you got in the water, that would be a bad thing. Now, our mechanics are awesome, and they're all like triple checked. In 13 years, I have never seen a plug out. Never. But I still have to go under. So we get on a creeper and we get underneath the duck. And you're also checking for any leaks or anything that looks weird. I told you all the things that we need to do this job. We don't have to know that much about the mechanics of the ducks. To get your CDL, you do, but we have such great mechanics, we're not going to be fixing the duck. And we have an extra duck and team throughout the day. So if a duck broke down, we would call for the extra duck and the mechanic. And so it would not be good for me to get up and get under the hood, because I have to be entertaining the group while people come. So I don't fix the ducks, and I can't fix the ducks. But we do 5 tours a day. So if I'm a 9 o'clock at the aquarium, I'm going to be scheduled to do a 9, 11, 1, 3, 5. So every 2 hours. And it's a lot of talking. I think it's over 7 hours. I think I did the math. It was 7 hours of straight talking. So it's 2 hours between tours, but it's an hour and 20-minute tour. So if you can get back in an hour and 20 minutes, and then people come down the ladder and say goodbye and stuff, so you might get 20 minutes to yourself. But if there's any traffic, you could be doing an hour and 30, hour 40. And if you do that a few times a day, you're talking for an extra hour, that kind of thing. We do pick and drops, which is we will pick a group up at a different location and drop them at a different location.
That's by request only, I would imagine.
Yes, and it costs more. It's usually a corporate group,
Yep.
and that we're going to all be at. We're going to be at Fenway Park. It could be at Fenway, which we do not drive by Fenway on a regular tour. We go over to Fenway Park, we'll pick them up, and they'll say whether it's a full tour because they have scheduled lunch somewhere, or scheduled dinner somewhere, or they just want to go straight to the water and come back, or that kind of thing. Or we're going to drop them off at Maggiano's, who takes a big group of people. So I like pick and drops because it changes things up. Like, where are we going? That'd be great.
So do you have history prepared for no matter kind of where you pick people up? I mean, that must change things for you.
That's a very appropriate question too. And you asked about the alternate routes. So once in a while, like Beacon Hill might be closed, and all of a sudden you get this alternate route. Now sometimes the guests know it, and sometimes it's on the fly. So we do know sometimes we have to go straight over the Mass Ave Bridge to Cambridge and make our way over to the ramp that way. And so, yes, you have to know something about all the areas. But there's also things that you can do, and I tell this to new narrators. If you know you're not going up Beacon Hill, and you get into Cambridge, you don't know that much about Cambridge, think about the stuff that you spoke about on Beacon Hill. And sometimes you really want to, because John Hancock had his mansion up there, and that's I think it's a really good visual. And if you don't get up there and don't get to mention it, it's like, well, when we get in the water, you can see the Capitol, the State House. And so you can talk about it then. Or if you're in Cambridge, you might even be able to see it. So you can do some tricks like that where you're not actually talking about exactly what's on the street if you're in areas that you don't usually go. And there are things, too, I tell them to look inside the duck. So if you're stuck in traffic in Cambridge and you're like, gosh, I don't know what to talk about, it's like, hey, tell them about the ducks themselves, because you haven't got to that yet. Tell them about Kilroy Was Here, because that is a story about, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a story about World War II, and it's written on the ducks. And so if you're stuck, you can look in and say, hey, these signatures on the roof, on the canopy, are because they used to be in the wars, and so we have veteran signs. So look within, think about different fun stories, and then we have also in the training, you definitely have your traffic stories, like the molasses flood. And the thank you tree. So Halifax sends down the Christmas tree because we helped them out of the 1917 explosion that was up there. And so you can talk about these things that don't have to have a location. And so, yeah, you got to keep it going, talk, and then you can also ask questions of them and stuff like that. But yeah, good to know something about all different areas, even if you're not usually there.
So I would imagine, unless you're a historian, you mix in a lot of different things. Again, my question earlier was you talk about the people we know, the Paul Reveres and such, but you must leave everybody leaving a duck must feel like they've just learned something, a lot of things new, because it sounds like you get deeper into, I mean, the typical person doesn't know anything about the molasses flood unless you live here, and I only know because I live here and learned it when I was younger, but the average person doesn't, from out of town, isn't going to know that story. That's for sure. They must feel like they're leaving with, I mean, and Boston has a ton of history. You don't need to make anything up. We get some wacky stuff that happened too, which is entertaining for sure. But I would imagine that part of it must leave a lot of people feeling like they just learned a lot of new stuff that they never knew about Boston.
I definitely strive for that. I want people's eyes to go, I didn't know that. And I actually wrote a note about that because it is fun when I see someone's face kind of go, oh, really? Or an ooh. I was talking about the ether. If you were, I sometimes ask, any of you been put to sleep to be operated on? Can you imagine having an operation without ether? And some people go, ooh, like, and I know they're listening, right? So, and I'll even say, hey, thanks for that face. I don't care whether you like it or not. You're listening, and that's all we ask for. I do try to get stuff that people haven't heard before. I really don't want to be boring. I don't want people to get off and say, yeah, I heard all the same stuff. I do like to go deeper and look, and I also want to be current because I want people to know that I'm not just giving them a tour from 3 years ago. So when there's like Shakespeare in the Park, which they've been doing for about 26 years, I want to know what the play is. So I'll say this year it's Much Ado About Nothing. And I'll look up quotes, and if there's something that's kind of funny or something, I'll mention the quote.
You're really just auditioning for that when you do it, and you're hoping they hear you over the microphone, I would imagine.
I love Shakespeare in the Park. Children, you really got to engage them, right? So one of my questions I'll say is, hey, kids, do you know why manhole covers are round? And I know these days you could get in trouble with the manhole cover. Andy, do you know why they're round?
Yes, I think I do. But I think of myself as a know-it-all, so I'm probably going to make this up. I'm guessing manhole covers are round because the cover itself can't fall in if it's round.
Excellent.
And if it's square, it could actually fall into the hole.
Excellent. Yeah, that's what I think is a fun fact. And if you think about it, if it were square, rectangular, you could pick it up, you could change the attitude of it, and it could fall in, it could kill somebody, and there'll be a hole in the ground. And so usually kids are like, oh. And then I kind of jumped to like, so, look around. There could be things about the city that are a certain way. Not everything's got a lot of thought put into it. We talk about, there's a big fire. We got a lot of fires in Boston history. But that's when they started having the doors open out. And you'd think, well, then the doors, if they were just really big, the doors could open, and the bigger they are, the better. It's like, well, not really, because then they're going to block the sidewalk. So there's a balance. You need them opening out, but not blocking. And so hopefully some of the kids will go, oh, okay, so there's some reason behind the things we're looking at. Another little back thing about the manhole covers is that they're very heavy. And so if they're round, you can roll them. So yeah, you pick them up, and now you can roll it out of the way. So again, little things like that. So I try to look... I've done so many tours that I try to look at everything around. I say, did you guys notice this light over here? Because again, it's just the whole way people approach information. It's like if I'm talking about 1776, that's going to be one part of the brain where they have to imagine it. But then they can go to, oh, I'm looking at that light and I'm dealing with that. And I think it's kind of refreshing to be using all parts of your brain like that.
One thing I'm getting from this interview is how much you care as a driver. I would assume that a good number of the drivers care. I imagine the company encourages that behavior and wants you to put your best foot forward. What are the stipulations that the company has as far as what information they want you to include? What kind of restrictions do they have on you? Do they want to see your tour and make sure that they're happy with what you're doing, all aspects, history, jokes, the whole bit? What kind of a leash are they giving you as far as being able to be your own person and create your own tour?
One of the biggest complaints we get from guests is that he spoke too much about himself or herself. So we will get that. And it's, again, I guess I keep coming back to balance, because I don't want it to be like a textbook. I want it to be something that reflects me. And I love games and I invent games. That's why I went with Jigsaw. There's other characters. Most characters have something to do with the person. We had a guy who did some stunt work in Hollywood, Extreme Eddie Airtime, and he is a stuntman, so that's his character. And so usually people have something to do with their character. So you definitely want to make it personal without being, and then, my sister, this and that.
So as far as restrictions, as far as content, how does the company... are they pretty hands-off? They allow you to kind of do what you want to do?
They're getting more handsy, as I think everybody is. And we've had some of the old-timers from previous years kind of move on because they felt like they were being restricted. And there's things that used to be funny that you can't say anymore, stuff like that. As far as content, there's some things that we're supposed to talk about. Again, they don't want people just getting up there. It is a little intoxicating when you get 35 people laughing at something you say, and then you want to build on that, and all of a sudden it becomes just a little comedy improv thing, and it's like, where's the history? Come on, go back to it. There's at least a few people who are waiting for that. So there are a few things they've asked us to talk about, and you talked about deep diving. Mary Dyer, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mary Dyer. So there used to be this mural on Newbury Street. And it was on Dartmouth and Newbury. There was big parking. They're putting a building there now, but there's a parking lot. And there was a mural, big 3-story mural on the brick wall. And it had all these people. Now, I grew up in Needham, Massachusetts, not too far out of town. And I thought, well, I'm going to know a lot of these people. I'm a native. And there was a legend. There was this thing right down by the street, and you could look and see who these people were. I didn't know any of those people. So, and I'm trying to think of who they probably were. One was probably Mary Dyer. Now, she lived in Boston, and she was a Puritan to begin with, and she became a Quaker. And so there is a statue of her next to the State House. So that's why we talk about her. And she was hanged for being a Quaker. Can you imagine? The Puritans come here for religious freedom, and they don't want to share it with anyone. So she's banned down to Rhode Island because Roger Williams said you can come down here. And she kept coming back because she didn't want Quakers being persecuted. And in 1660, she was hanged on the Boston Common. But then we say that she sits there as a symbol of religious freedom because John Adams heard about her story and put freedom of religion in the Massachusetts Constitution. So my company, Boston Duck Tours, really wants us to mention Mary Dyer. And I don't know if that goes back. It could go back to the owner, Andy Wilson, who sadly died a number of years ago. Again, before I met him, it was like 2005 or so. But history was important to him. He wanted to get things right. And so I think we're supposed to talk about Mary Dyer. I try to talk about so many things that my company doesn't question me. They know I'm going to give a lot of good history. I think some of the things are, hey, if you're not giving a history, make sure at least you talk about Mary Dyer, and at least you talk about the landfill project that filled in Boston. Some of the big things like that. That's just in case you're not getting any real good content. And like I said before, they don't want you to be negative. I want to talk about, this street is always, we're not supposed to talk about traffic. This street is always jammed up, or there's always a lot of trash over here, which is not really true. Like, we do have people from all over the world and the country and the world. And I usually hear that Boston's very clean. They're very hey, it's very clean. So just to keep on the positive side.
Well, that's good. I mean, it sounds to me like you're able to kind of do your own thing for the most part, and that's something that is disappearing, I think, in this world, and especially with creative jobs like yours. It's not just here's a script, read it verbatim. It's nice to know that you have that freedom to become who you want and make your tour your own. That's great.
If I could say to young people starting out in their careers, look for the different types of careers, if that's what you need, because I didn't know that this is where I would end up. I tried lots of things. I do create games, and I just knew that I couldn't be at a desk job, but I didn't know that the Ducks would be such a good spot for me. And when I got there, I was like, wow, I love this because I can change things on the fly. I like that. And people aren't, looking over my shoulder so much. And in the beginning, there was even more freedom of some of the routes. We do have different routes. But I like that I can hear something on the radio in the morning. And if they say that Xander Bogaerts, just got, his third double of the week and there's a record for this or that, I can mention that because there'll be people in who are going to the Red Sox that night. And if I tell them something that I just learned and I didn't have to put it through a committee or get by anybody, as long as I make it interesting and keep it clean, then I can do that. Oh.
That's great. That's good freedom to have in a job, for sure.
Is. I say to people on the tour that I like that my job has a kind of a flow to it and a rhythm. When we start tours in March, we have the Charles River to ourselves. And if there's ice on the river, we can't give tours. We can cut through the ice, but what we've done in training sometimes when it's icy out there and we're just us, you try to go up the ramp and you actually slide down the ramp. Now, if we need to, we can tow each other out. We have a line in the front and the back, so that's what we have to do, back a duck down and tow it out. But so we have the place to ourselves in March, and then it starts getting busier, and people show up, and of course, busiest is 4th of July. And so you get a lot of private boats, which is a lot of fun, the drawbridge going up, and there's lots of things to look at. And then it starts tailing off again, and it goes down to, and the last tour is usually the Sunday after Thanksgiving. And so by then you've got the river to yourself again. So you get to see the rhythm of Boston. You see the trees, when they're naked, and then they're green, and then they're orange, and you get to see the whole thing of life. And you get a little break in the wintertime, so that's a good thing.
Well, and I imagine your job being in Boston, we've talked about the history of all of it, but what would it be like to be a narrator in, Terre Haute, Indiana? Well,
I've thought about that. Like, would I want to do that somewhere else? Now, we do have narrators who come from other places, but I always liked that I'm from here, so that if someone asks me about the blizzard of 78, I can tell them that I was here, and that's when we opened up the new lock and dam system that we are actually going right near, so I can tie right into that. And I just like that there's a depth to the tour because I'm from here. I guess it's okay to do it, if guys from Alabama is giving you a tour of Boston, I guess that's okay. But I would want someone from there. I did travel to New Zealand a number of years ago. They have ducks down there.
Oh.
And I took a duck tour.
I assume they go the other direction.
They do. And they're called WKUDs. And I considered actually doing tours down there in the wintertime, since that's their summertime. And I talked to one of the guys there, had been to Boston, and he knew about the duck tours and knew that we were considered to be one of the premier tours. And but when I took their tour, I was actually kind of bored. Like, I love New Zealand. It's beautiful. But the duck tours go into this little lake it's near a place that has like kind of the sulfury smell and stuff. So you're going by trees. Like, that made me really appreciate Boston. I'm like, wow, we've got the revolutionary history. We've got the sports history. We've got the invention of the telephone. So we've got the Industrial Revolution and on and on. You've got so much history, civil rights. And so we can talk about so many things. It was a beautiful country, New Zealand. Not good duck tours.
So the Ducks are a big part of today's tourist attractions in Boston. Certainly have a good name, but the powers that be here in Boston have decided this is a good way to gather folks together for special occasions. For example, Boston's had an incredible run of incredible amount of championships, sports championships, and someone in the city government decided this would probably be a great idea to show off our championship pride without having to have massive crowds in one particular place. We just do a parade instead, and hey, let's use those wacky ducks, not duck boats, ducks. We'll use a whole parade of them, and it's a pretty good idea, and I think it's expanded from there. Tell me a little bit about that and what it's like to drive in something like that.
Yeah, so the rolling rallies. The story goes that, it was either the Patriots or the Red Sox came to all the tour companies in Boston and said, we need some vehicles for a parade. And the story goes that the other companies said, okay, we'll do it for this much and we'll do it for that much. And Boston Ducks said, we'll do it for free. And they were smart. Like, it becomes synonymous with Championship Parade, Rev Up the Ducks. It's really exciting. It's one of the things we did was we get very early over to Dorchester. We'll talk about 4:30 in the morning, and we get the Ducks so it's dark. And depending upon, let's talk about the last Red Sox parade. So I showed up to the Duck garage, and everybody was getting their assignments to their Duck, and we drive all the different Ducks. And it's a Red Sox parade. I went upstairs for a moment. I came back down. Everybody was gone. I said to my boss, what do I have? Which Duck? And he goes, you're on Nathan. And I turned to walk away, and then I was like, wait a minute, Nathan. The whole name of Nathan is Red Sox Nathan. I said, Red Sox Nate. I turned around. I'm like, he looks at me, he goes, yeah, number one. I'm like, I'm the number one Duck. That's very cool. And we all have a deckhand because there's a lot of craziness on the Duck. And he goes, yep, your deckhand is Cindy Brown, our CEO. And I said, oh, I like to be number one Duck. It's Cindy Brown. And so then we get a police escort, which is everyone should do, right? They say like you don't get that till your funeral, right? It's like, so you drive the Ducks. Now, there's not a lot of traffic at now it's about 5 or something in the morning. But just to drive through Dorchester over to Fenway Park for this one. And we line up, and then, then we are able to go and get some coffee and stuff because we wait for everyone to show up. So I'm on my Duck right up in front, and on comes Pedro Martinez and then Big Papi David Ortiz. And David came down the aisle, was shaking everybody's hands. And I looked at him, I said, you're a hugger. And I went in for the hug. And later I thought, well, he probably hugs people he knows. or maybe after they hit a home run or something like that. But once the parade starts, I don't have interaction with the people on my Duck, really, because I've got to be paying attention. I would like to mention another thing about that parade that was really touching for me. They have some things kind of like a Make-A-Wish program. And so you never know who's going to be on your tour. Could be some families, could be press, could be anybody. So before Pedro and David showed up, this family showed up. They looked at me and they said, Jigsaw, we had your tour this summer. I'm like, of course you did. I remember you, which I kind of didn't, but I try to connect with everybody. And they're like, they were so elated, and their son was getting treatment at one of the hospitals, and he got to be on the first Duck. And they were so sweet because they were like, we're definitely happy to be in the parade, but we're so psyched it's you. And so I have a picture of me with them, and that's pretty cool. That's the kind of thing you hope you touch people.
Well, and especially on a day when they're going to see so many other stars, and you're the main attraction. That's pretty special.
Well, and I think that says something about humans, right? It's like they're looking at David Ortiz and the crowds and stuff, but that's a bit impersonal. But we had a connection, so that means so much. It means, maybe more than stardom. It's like, well, those are great, and everyone's looking at them, but we know this guy, and he knows us. Right. So yeah, it's cool.
That's great. Well, that being said, I'm hearing rumors that you have officially given your last tour. Tell me more. What gives?
What gives? It's time for me to move on. So I've done 13 years, and I think I've done about 4,000 tours.
Wow.
4,000 times.
That's a lot.
When I think about splashing in the Charles River, that's 4,000 in and 4,000 out. So I've been on that ramp 8,000 times, plus all the training and whatnot. I would never have thought that I would have been here that long. Now, in 13 years ago, we had 7 of us start, and there are still 2 of us left. Plucky Ruffles actually does more training, so I'm not sure if he did many tours this year. But there are people who have done or been there longer. So we've had like an 18-year and a 20-year, and so God love them, for doing that. I would have thought that it would get old, but I've been able to keep it fresh, I feel, and now it's just starting to turn. I think I'm getting where I'm saying the same stuff a little bit too much. And I've got some ideas of other things that I want to do. I will be turning 60 in April. And I was like, you know what? Life is short, and I've been talking about these other ideas. So it's been a really special place. And I've done 5 championship parades. I got to drive. My first one was in 2011 for the Bruins. And I was the second duck, which is the best. You put down that windshield, and you're looking at the first duck, and that has the Stanley Cup trophy. And to be up there, like I said, you got a great view on the duck of everything, and to be going through the crowds at that level, and it's just really special to grow up near Boston and to be able to drive through town. I mean, I've done St. Patrick's Day Parade. I'd never been to the St. Patrick's Day Parade before, and the only time I went was in a duck. And Gay Pride Parade, and St. Columbus Day Parade, and the Hasty Pudding over in Harvard. And I've had an MTV movie crew come on, or film crew come on. We did, the most famous person I was with was Nick Offerman, if you know the actor Nick Offerman.
Of course, from Parks and Rec.
Movies.
Yep.
And his wife, Megan Mullally, from Will and Grace and many other things. They were
and Parking Recs.
She also in Parking Rec.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they were great. I had them on my tour, and it was when I was doing the driving as well. And so what you do is when you have to drive and narrate, you sit and you talk to the group for a little bit and get a little intro, and then you get in a seat and you start driving. And we have a big mirror, so we still, when we tell stories, sometimes we still look up as if we're talking into the mirror. But so I sat down and I'm doing my intro, and I'm like, wow, this guy looks like Nick Offerman. And I'd only been there a few years, I think. And I was like, oh, it really looks like Nick Offerman. And while I'm talking, right? So that's what you do. So I get in, start driving. And I actually gave that line about the crossword puzzle, and later on we talked briefly about it. But on the water, we get people coming up and driving, which is nice. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that. But so a young child came up from the back to drive, and Nick took a picture, and then that's when it occurred to me. I'm like, oh wait, you guys all together. His whole family was there. He was in town to do a Confederacy of Dunces at the Huntington Theater. So they're getting off a duck, and I said, Nick, do you mind if we get a picture? And, I got a nice picture of me and Nick. He was great. And then his wife came over, and she said, Jigsaw, you were talking about this building, and I love when people ask questions. Like, wow, they really care about it. And that I hadn't seen her sitting right next to him. And so I looked down at her and I said, I didn't realize you were there. I'm like, can we get a picture? I guess I said. And she said, oh, yeah, no problem. She goes, yeah, Nick and I have been married for a long time. And I said, oh, so that means no chance for me? And she looked over at Nick and said, because he's talking to his family, go, hey, Nick, I'm leaving with Jigsaw. And he says, hun, we had a good run. So they were really cool. So in the water, we do get people come up and drive, which is fun for a lot of people. And we'll get people who are in their 20s or something and say, oh, I took a duck tour 14 years ago, and I got to drive. And I was like, yeah, you get to drive in the water. So earlier this season, on another duck, this person came up to drive, and we have adults come up and drive too. And the narrator told this person, hard to port. He's telling this person how to drive a duck. And so this person goes back to this person's seat. The narrator's talking, and finally this person says, oh, well, by the way, I am the 77th commander of the USS Constitution. And the reason I keep saying this person is not to give it away, but she's the first woman commander ever of the Constitution, Commander Billie J. Farrell. And the reason I know all this is because she was so sweet. I think the narrator and the driver said, hey, we showed you around our vessel. Maybe you could give us, she said, definitely. get some people from your company, come on over. I will give you a tour of the USS Constitution, the oldest commissioned warship still afloat in the entire world today. So I got to be one of 9 people who got a tour of the Constitution by Commander Billy J. Farrell. And it was so cool. She took about an hour and a half with us, did not give us the bum's rush. We got to go down where other people don't get to go. She opened up this trap door, and she said, if you want to climb down there, you can. 3 of us went down, and we were right on the inside of the hull. We hung out with her for a while. She's from Kentucky. She's 39 years old. She's got 2 kids. She's sweet as can be, but also commanding, very commanding. And at the end, we're up on the deck. People were saying hi to her. Some people knew her story, and some people just thought maybe she was just dressed up. So she has to encounter all those kind of people. And I finally said to her, I said, we should all go out for a beer sometime. She said, I told you, it's bourbon. I'm from Kentucky. I said, okay, Commander, got it.
So did you get to drive? So I see a picture of her here, and she's dressed, I assume it's Halloween. She's dressed as Captain Crunch.
She would tell people those shoulder things are metal, and they're each like 7 pounds. Ooh. Yeah, and the hat is huge. You can't see because she's turning straight on, but sideways, it's really big. So that's why people didn't know she was just dressed up or she was really a commander.
Wonderful, Steve. Thank you. Steve Heffernan, he is a ductor, Boston ductor, ductator. No, wait, no, what?
Conductor?
I like ductator.
We could change it.
Steve Heffernan, Boston Ductors Conductor. Thank you so much for your insight into what it takes to be a duck driver, as well as a little bit of a peek into a little bit of Boston history. I appreciate the time. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. And next time I'll ask you questions because you are fascinating.
Thanks for listening to Occupations. Hope you'll join us again for the next segment. Thank you again.
Occupations has been brought to you by lotsofmaps.com. Please follow Occupations the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to find information about our next episode or to see what past episodes are available.